St. Francis Xavier was born on April 7, 1506, at the castle of Xavier in the region of Navarre, Spain. Son of a noble Basque family, he was educated from an early age with discipline and religiosity, despite the influences of a world marked by political and military disputes. Young Francis grew up amid the tension between the Kingdom of Navarre and the Crown of Castile, which would eventually annex his homeland. This backdrop of conflicts shaped part of his determination and resilience, traits that would be fundamental in his missionary life. At the age of 19, Francis left for the University of Paris, a renowned learning center at the time. There, he stood out for his intelligence and charisma, quickly earning the admiration of peers and teachers. Although inclined towards the humanities, he had not yet felt the deep call to religious life. It was in Paris that Francis Xavier met Saint Ignatius of Loyola, a friendship that would change his life forever. Initially skeptical about Ignatius' fervor, Francis resisted his attempts to convert his heart to a higher purpose. Over time, the companionship with Ignatius and the impact of his spirituality won Francis over. A striking phrase from Ignatius, "What does it profit a man to gain the whole world yet forfeit his soul?" resonated deeply, leading him to transformative reflection. In 1534, Francis, Ignatius, and 5 other companions took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience in Montmartre, Paris. This group would give rise to the Society of Jesus, an order that would become essential in the spiritual renewal of the Church during the Counter-Reformation. Ordained a priest in 1537, Francis dedicated himself intensely to preaching and teaching. His eloquence, coupled with a deep spirituality, made him a captivating preacher, able to inspire multitudes. In 1540, the Society of Jesus was officially approved by Pope Paul III, and Francis was sent to the court of Portugal. There, he began preparing for the mission that would mark his life, the evangelization of the lands of the East. King John III of Portugal, wishing to strengthen the Christian faith in his colonies, requested Jesuit missionaries for India. Francis Xavier was chosen, accepting the call with enthusiasm and courage, even aware of the dangers and challenges he would face. In 1541, he embarked for the East, departing from Lisbon on a long and perilous sea voyage. During the journey, Francis began his missionary work, ministering to the sailors and caring for the sick on board. Arriving in Goa in 1542, Francis found a Christian community in need of guidance and spiritual revitalization. With tireless zeal, he dedicated himself to preaching, catechism, and reform of local customs. Not limiting himself to the city, Francis traveled through various regions of the Indian coast. Facing extreme climates and precarious conditions, his heart burned with the desire to bring God's word to souls who had not yet met Christ. One of Francis's strategies was to adapt his preaching to local cultures, learning languages and customs to facilitate communication. This innovative approach made him a respected missionary, even by those who did not share his faith. During his time in India, Francis Xavier founded several Christian communities, building churches and establishing schools. He firmly believed in education as a pathway to strengthen faith and promote human development. In 1545, Francis decided to expand his mission to the Moluccas Islands in present-day Indonesia. There, he encountered hostile tribes, but also won many hearts with his humility and fervor. The fame of his holiness spread rapidly, and multitudes sought to hear his words and receive the sacraments from his hands. Despite the difficulties, Francis never allowed himself to rest, driven by the desire to save souls. In 1549, Francis embarked for Japan, where he would begin a new phase of his mission. Despite linguistic and cultural barriers, he soon stood out for his ability to dialogue and adapt the Christian message to the Japanese context. In Japan, Francis faced opposition from local leaders, but also found allies who helped him spread the gospel. He planted the seeds of Christianity in the country, establishing communities that would endure for centuries. Francis's work in Japan was marked by patience and respect for local traditions. He understood that true evangelization required not just words, but also actions and testimonies of life. After about 2 years in Japan, Francis felt the call to evangelize China, one of the greatest missionary challenges of the time. With courage and determination, he began preparations for this new journey, despite his weakened health. In 1552, Francis Xavier left Japan for China, taking only a few faithful companions. He knew that the doors of the Chinese Empire were closed to foreigners, but his unwavering faith propelled him to try. Arriving at the island of Shangchuan, near the Chinese coast, Francis began planning his entry into the country. Despite logistical difficulties and local opposition, he remained firm, convinced that his mission was ordained by God. During this period, Francis suffered from illness and exhaustion. Long journeys, extreme climates, and scarce resources had taken their toll, but he continued to work, driven by his love for souls. Francis spent most of his time in prayer and fasting, asking God for strength and wisdom to fulfill his mission. He also wrote letters to his Jesuit brothers, reporting on the challenges and encouraging them to persevere in their own missionary work. While waiting for an opportunity to enter China, Francis dedicated himself to teaching and administering the sacraments to the few Christians in the region. He never missed a chance to plant the seed of the gospel, even in adverse conditions. His charity and humility won the admiration of many, including local sailors and merchants, who recognized in him an uncommon sanctity. However, the Chinese authorities remained inflexible, refusing to allow his entry. Amid these difficulties, Francis contracted a severe fever, exacerbated by fatigue and the lack of proper medical care. Even so, he continued to pray and dream of China's conversion. Francis Xavier died on December 3, 1552, at the age of 46, on the island of Shangchuan. He departed this world alone, but with the certainty that he had faithfully fulfilled the mission God had entrusted to him. His death was a shock to those who knew him, but also a source of inspiration. His testimony of courage, faith, and unconditional love for humanity remained alive in the memory of all who had the privilege of crossing his path. Francis' body was miraculously preserved from corruption, a sign that many interpreted as a manifestation of his holiness. He was taken to Goa, where he was buried in the Basilica of Bom Jesus, becoming a center of pilgrimage. In 1619, Francis Xavier was beatified by Pope Paul V, an official recognition by the Church of his extraordinary life of holiness and missionary service. His canonization occurred in 1622 by Pope Gregory XV, along with other great saints, such as Saint Ignatius of Loyola. As the patron saint of missions, Saint Francis Xavier became a model for all Catholic missionaries. His zeal for evangelization and his willingness to sacrifice everything for the kingdom of God inspired generations of Christians. His figure is associated with the missionary spirit of the Society of Jesus, which continued to expand the work he started, taking the gospel to the ends of the earth. Francis Xavier became a symbol of the transformative power of faith and courage. The devotion to St. Francis Xavier spread throughout the world, especially in the communities he evangelized. Churches and schools were dedicated to him, perpetuating his legacy of teaching and spirituality. The Basilica of Bom Jesus in Goa, where his body rests, has become a sacred site, attracting millions of pilgrims every year. Many have witnessed special graces received through his intercession, reinforcing his reputation for holiness. In his writings and letters, Francis revealed his deep trust in divine providence. He believed that even in the greatest difficulties, God directed all things for the good. His life was marked by total surrender to God, unafraid to face dangers or renunciations. This courage and commitment make him a living example of how it is possible to trust fully in divine will. Beyond his missionary role, Francis Xavier is also remembered as a man of prayer. His long hours before the Blessed Sacrament reflected his intimacy with God, the source of all his strength and inspiration. His dedication to education, especially among the young, shows his long-term vision for the church. He believed that a solid faith could only be built on firm foundations, and so he endeavored to train catechists and Christian leaders. Today, St. Francis Xavier continues to be celebrated as one of the greatest missionaries in the history of the church. His life testifies that, with faith, courage, and love, it is possible to overcome any obstacle to bring Christ's message to the world. After his death, St. Francis Xavier became a living example of missionary perseverance, especially for the Society of Jesus. His successors continued the work he had started, expanding the Christian presence in the East, even in adverse contexts. The fame of His Holiness quickly crossed the oceans, and news of his missionary feats reached Europe, inspiring new missionaries to dedicate their lives to evangelizing distant lands. A distinguishing feature of Francis was his ability to combine courage with humility. He not only preached the Christian faith, but also lived with simplicity, earning the trust and respect of the peoples he evangelized. Among the accounts of his mission, the miracles attributed to him stand out, such as healings, instant conversions, and the gift of tongues. These stories strengthened his reputation and helped open doors for Christianity in hostile regions. Francis was known for his insistence on learning local languages and adapting to the cultures of the peoples he encountered. He knew that the gospel would only be effective if communicated in a comprehensible and respectful manner. In Japan, for example, he strove to understand the complex system of values and traditions of the local people. Although he initially faced difficulties, his respect for the Japanese made him a deeply loved and respected missionary. Despite his great achievements, Francis never boasted of his accomplishments. He attributed all successes to the grace of God, remaining deeply humble and dedicated to service. One of the most significant legacies of Francis was his role as a cultural mediator. He did not see cultural differences as barriers, but as opportunities to enrich the dialogue between the Christian faith and local traditions. His vision of a universal church, capable of embracing diversity, anticipated many of the principles that would be discussed centuries later at the Second Vatican Council. He was a precursor of inculturation in the Church's mission. The missionary ardor of Francis inspired hundreds of young people to join the Society of Jesus with the desire to follow in his footsteps. Many of them would face similar challenges, but always looking to Francis as a source of courage. The correspondence of Francis with St. Ignatius of Loyola offers a glimpse into his spirituality and missionary vision. In these letters, he expresses his love for God and the souls he sought to save, along with his unwavering trust in divine providence. Francis was also a master in organization and in training local leaders. He understood that the success of his mission depended on the empowerment of catechists and leaders to continue the work after his departure. In the Moluccas, he faced not only the hostility of local tribes, but also the competition of traders who feared losing power with the introduction of Christianity. Still, he persevered, trusting that God would open the necessary paths. In Japan, he faced extremely harsh conditions, from the climate to cultural and religious differences. Even so, he managed to plant the first seeds of Christianity, which would bear fruit for centuries. Francis' desire to enter China symbolized his vision that no barrier was too great for the gospel. Although he did not achieve this goal, his determination continues to inspire those dedicated to the Church's mission. His love for the poor and marginalized was evident in all his actions. He believed that Christ was especially present in the most needy, and he dedicated himself with special zeal to caring for these souls. Francis also had a deep devotion to the Virgin Mary, often asking for her intercession in difficulties. He saw her as a model of obedience and total surrender to God's will. His life was marked by rigorous spiritual discipline, with long hours of prayer and penance. He believed that personal holiness was essential for his mission to be truly fruitful. Even in moments of extreme difficulty, Francis never lost hope. He saw each obstacle as an opportunity to deepen his trust in God and offer his suffering as a sacrifice for the good of souls. Today, St. Francis Xavier is recognized as the patron saint of Asia, reflecting the immense influence his life and work had on this continent. His figure is revered by both Catholics and others who recognize his historical and spiritual contribution. The devotion to St. Francis Xavier is not limited to the places where he served as a missionary. Around the world, his figure inspires Christian communities to cultivate a missionary spirit and service to the Church. The celebrations in his honor are marked by processions, solemn masses, and moments of prayer. In Goa, where his body rests, the feast of St. Francis Xavier attracts thousands of pilgrims from various nations. Francis' example also has a profound impact on the lives of priests and missionaries. His story of total dedication to Christ's mission encourages them to persevere, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. His life and work have been extensively documented both by his contemporaries and by church historians. These sources not only record his deeds, but also reveal the man of deep faith and charity that he was. The work of St. Francis Xavier also contributed to shaping the identity of the Society of Jesus. He is often remembered as one of the greatest exponents of the Jesuit charism, with its focus on missions and education. His canonization, alongside St. Ignatius of Loyola, was a milestone for the Church, recognizing the importance of the spiritual renewal promoted by the Society of Jesus in the context of the Counter-Reformation. In his life, Francis faced not only external challenges, such as persecutions and adverse conditions, but also internal difficulties, such as homesickness and doubts. His ability to overcome them with unwavering faith is an example of perseverance. The Christian communities founded by Francis Xavier faced severe persecutions at various times, especially in Japan and China. However, their faith and legacy allowed these communities to survive and continue to grow. Francis also left a testimony about the importance of communication. He used creative methods to teach the faith, such as songs and stories adapted to local cultures, making the gospel accessible and understandable. Despite his early death, the work of Francis Xavier continued to bear abundant fruit. His life is a reminder that the impact of a missionary is not measured only by the length of work, but by the depth of dedication. The name of St. Francis Xavier was given to several educational and missionary institutions around the world. These institutions perpetuate his legacy of missionary zeal and commitment to the comprehensive formation of the person. The Basilica of Bom Jesus in Goa is today a symbol of his constant presence in the lives of the faithful. The incorrupt body of Francis is a source of admiration and inspiration, reinforcing the sanctity of his life. The miracles attributed to his intercession are numerous and continue to be recorded. From inexplicable healings to solutions for impossible problems, St. Francis Xavier is a powerful intercessor for those who turn to him with faith. Francis Xavier's spirituality also resonates with the mission of the Church in modern times. He is seen as a precursor of intercultural and interreligious dialogue, promoting mutual respect in contexts of diversity. In a world marked by divisions, Francis Xavier's example as a bridge builder is more relevant than ever. His ability to find points of connection with other cultures continues to be a valuable lesson for contemporary evangelization. Francis is often portrayed holding a crucifix, a symbol of his passion for Christ's cross and his total commitment to the mission. This image is an invitation for all Christians to carry their crosses with love and faith. His devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus and his deep trust in the intercession of the Virgin Mary were central elements of his spirituality. These devotions strengthened his faith and sustained him in the most difficult times. Reflecting on the life of St. Francis Xavier, we see the power of a heart completely surrendered to God. He shows us that holiness is not a matter of comfort, but of sacrifice and service. The memory of St. Francis Xavier remains alive in the prayers of the Church, in the testimonies of missionaries, and in the lives transformed by his intercession. He is a beacon of hope for those dedicated to the mission of bringing Christ to the world. Thus, St. Francis Xavier remains a giant of faith, a true apostle of the East. His life is proof that, with God's grace, it is possible to accomplish great works, provided we are willing to answer the call with generosity and love.